Sunetra Gupta from Oxford University on, and she was implying, and I'm interested in you because you have a global mandate, a global view, was that a problem we don't think about in lockdowns is that they're very nationalistic. That if we lock down our economy, then it hits our economy. But it also means we are not buying stuff, we're not trading with weaker economies, we are not just destroying our own jobs, we're destroying the jobs of all those that in the poorer parts of the world that export to us. That seemed to me to be a reasonable point.
Really important point by Professor Gupta. I want to say it again. We in the World Health Organization do not advocate lockdowns as a primary means of control of this virus. The only time we believe a lockdown is justified is to buy you time to reorganize, regroup, rebalance your resources, protect your health workers who are exhausted. But by and large, we'd rather not do it. Just look at what's happened to the tourism industry, for example, in the Caribbean or in the Pacific, because people aren't taking their holidays. Look what's happened to smallholder farmers all over the world because their markets have got dented. Look what's happening to poverty levels. It seems that we may well have a doubling of world poverty by next year. We may well have at least a doubling of child malnutrition because children are not getting meals at school and their parents in poor families are not able to afford it. This is a terrible, ghastly global catastrophe, actually. And so we really do appeal to all world leaders. Stop using lockdown as your primary control method. Develop better systems for doing it. Work together and learn from each other. But remember, lockdowns just have one consequence that you must never, ever belittle, and that is making poor people an awful lot poorer.
Wow. Okay, note to producer Vish. Let's get to the meat rather than the intro from that.
I think I had that marked at start at 38. The knuckle brain at the start didn't need it. But
Andrew Neil is one of the most disingenuous. I want to look down the barrel because I'm sure Andrew Neil watches this. One of the most disingenuous, fake, lying propagandists that there is in news media. Fact. Jack Maxey.
All right, well, let's not let the lying propagandists negate from what the World Health Organization official said.
Right.
And I think there's a growing consensus around the world that we have made a great error in keeping this world shut down. And there was some evidence that came out from Florida last week. They have almost no infections in their schools. Nobody has died. There's not a single school in the state of Florida with more than 3 or 4 faculty members who've been infected. So I think that what we're starting to realize, for example, Raheem, we're looking at infections going up by 10%, say 17%, I think is the 14-day average. They're up 17% according to the New York Times. Yet deaths and mortalities are down 5%. So either the medical treatment is getting much, much better, or we are watching this virus, in my opinion, start to decay over time, and it is less lethal, et cetera, et cetera. You did have Tedros come out today and say that lockdowns were the thing that we had to do because we had this novel virus and it would be just irresponsible not to have done something at the start. He said there's never been a moment in history in which herd immunity has been the strategy. Mr. Tedros, Mr. Lee Mao Tedros, I want to remind you that there has never been a strategy in history where we shut down the entire planet either. The normal course of events in history were that herd immunity occurred over time or these viruses sort of die out over time. I want to point out, Raheem, and I'd love to get your input on this. Personally, I'm not a real believer that we're going to have 6 billion people on planet Earth vaccinated by next year so as to have this herd immunity through the vaccine. I can't imagine that that's happening. We just found out today that Johnson & Johnson has delayed their trials in the United States. It's not clear yet. Apparently one of the participants had an adverse reaction. Obviously, this was the abundance of safety. This is nothing to say that there's anything wrong with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, but we've seen the same thing occur with the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. I think it's important for people to understand that I do not think that this vaccine is going to be a silver bullet under any circumstances. And there was some talk earlier today on MSNBC where Dr. Gupta from Washington or University of Washington, they were arguing about how irresponsible Donald Trump is at super spreader events where everybody's going to die, unlike NBA super spreader events where it's only police cars and public property that pay the price. And I think that people are just starting to recognize that, hey, we can deal with this. We can live with this. I think a huge tell, Raheem, last week was that spontaneous rally at the old age home in Colorado where these elderly people came out and said, you know what? I'd rather die of COVID than die of loneliness. Almost universally, they said, I just want to hug my family. I want to see my grandchildren. The average death from this is 78 years old. So if you're 78 years old, you lost 6-8 months of that timeline, even if you're healthy. And I think that it's time to stop, Raheem. Your thoughts?
Let me ask you. Well, I don't actually have many thoughts on this. Myself. It's one of those situations where I was very heavily, on the side of the 30 days to slow the spread. I think that was a responsible thing to do when we didn't know more about the virus. Right? It was at its. It could have been far worse. Put it that way. Right? And I think.
No question.
And I think the erring on the side of caution at the very beginning of these things is probably the way to go. However, it has gone to ridiculous lengths. I mean, the fact that people are being told that they can't vote now, it helps obviously that they're Democrats, but that are actually afraid of it. But the idea that you can go to Target but that you can't go and line up and vote is obviously a manifest nonsense. But I want to get your thoughts on something that the British Health Secretary said today, and I want to see how you feel about this, Jack. And I'm going to just quote here from I've got to forget his name, Matthew Hancock. So he says, quote, "First, it says that enough people get COVID, we will reach herd immunity. This is not true. Many infectious diseases never reach herd immunity, like measles and malaria and AIDS and flu. And with increasing evidence of reinfection, we should have no confidence that we would ever reach herd immunity to COVID, even if everyone caught it. Herd immunity is a flawed goal without a vaccine, even if we could get to it, which we can't. The second central claim is that we can segregate the old and the vulnerable on our way to herd immunity. This is simply not possible. We're not the kind of country that abandons our vulnerable or just locks them up," end quote.
Okay, well, let's start backwards. They are the kind of country that abandons their old and just locks them up, and they failed miserably. The very idea of going in public and comparing the idea of herd immunity with AIDS, a lethal disease, is idiotic, right? Measles is also, quite frankly, quite a lethal and damaging disease, much worse than COVID-19 for the vulnerable of measles, the young. And it's very, very infectious. That's why measles requires a vaccination rate in the high 90s just to be effective. It's one of the reasons why anti-vaxxers create these little measles outbreaks all around the country, because we require that level of herd immunity. But then you have all these people today. For example, let's remember the influenza vaccine. If they get it 50, 60% right in any given year, they're really happy. Let's remember what's the backbone of the influenza vaccine every year. It's a mutated version of the 1918 influenza virus and dozens of other potential influenza viruses, including several coronaviruses. So I just don't believe that they are going to solve this thing with the vaccine. And quite frankly, if you are a young person, you have to think about this. Is it better to take a risky vaccine or risk getting a disease that theoretically will not harm you at all if you are young and healthy? These are facts. These are uncomfortable facts, but the public is starting to understand, and certainly science is starting to understand it. We had the declaration from the scientists just last week who are all advocating that we need to open it up. We are doing more damage to young people. We are causing more suicide. We have willfully, probably in the greatest error in the history of the modern era, destroyed the global economy. And for what? People are starting to ask the question, for what? And I think it's a reasonable question. And I think realistically going forward, I think science is going to be the victim here, because people do not feel that science created a definitive answer here. I think they believe that science, quotations, promoted excessive fear. And here we are 9 months into this pandemic. We've had lower than 5% infection rates in the testing now for 3 weeks or more. This is well below the 5% magic number for a dangerous infectious disease. And yet here we are still fomenting this idea of fear. Still this idea, you see it on the street. Raheem, tell me, when you walk down the street, don't you see these people that'll cross the avenue rather than pass you on a sidewalk without a mask?
That's how people react to me anyway, though.
Well, that may be true. That may be true, brother. But we see it. It's like Vish and I, when we walk home from work, there's always a couple people that we pass every day. You know, you get used to the same
Is that
route.
because you're holding hands, though?
Well, then they're just homophobic.
Homophobes.
Yeah,
Terrible.
exactly.
Look, Jack, what else are we learning now? How many signatures do we have on this Barrington Declaration now?
The Barrington Declaration, I believe, has over 15,000 signatures. The last time I looked a few days ago, it was at 12,000. So I'm sure there are more and more. And the Great Barrington Document is not written by right-wing radicals. This is supported by some very, very thoughtful people who are just looking at the numbers. And you can go back in history, and it helps you question what we're doing. If you look at the Hong Kong flu of 68, 69, on a relative basis, it killed more Americans than this did. Not a single school was ever shut down. Not a single city was ever shut down. They never got actually, ironically, in that case, they did get a vaccine pretty quickly, but it was just considered part of the annual flu program. And then the same thing was done with the Shanghai flu in the late 50s. Relatively speaking, it was a greater number. Now, granted, there was a lot of fear at the start of this, and let's remember who promoted that fear. The Communist Chinese Party. How is it that when we look around the world, we say, communists don't do it better, but when they decide to weld you into your apartment and shut down your life and tell you you can't do anything, think how frightening it is that these theoretically liberal Western leaders immediately defaulted to the communist model to control this pandemic. And have they succeeded? No, but they succeeded in controlling you. And you have to wonder why. Why has all of this occurred? Not just how, but why. And I think these are all questions that history is going to ask over the next several years. And I think it's going to be very, very damaging for a lot of people. I think we're in the situation almost like at the end of the Second World War, where you had all the Germans expecting they were going to have some miracle weapon that was going to save them. So they kept going in this deluded notion that at one point they were going to be rescued. This seems to be like the leftist opinion of the coronavirus. Like one day there's going to be this magic medicine that's going to solve the whole problem. Maybe. But guess what? Life's dangerous business. You got to go forward with it. You can't hide in your basement forever unless you're Joe Biden.
I like the idea of, and obviously we had Steve wearing the new Federal State of China hat, which a lot of people said they want at the beginning of the show. I like the idea of having like a Jack Maxey motivational poster, right, that says, what is it? Life's a dangerous business.
That's right. Being free is a dangerous business, but it's all worth it.
Who would pay for that? Come on, life's a dangerous business. Jack Maxey promotional posters. We're gonna
and
make
you're
sure
always
going to
fail, but you may as well be smiling on the way out.
We'll be back in a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to the War Room. Hey, Raheem, I want to give you a notice that on Jack Maxey's T-shirt, "Life is a dangerous business." My 3 ex-wives have already contacted me, blown my phone up. They want to order them in bulk. So,
Yep.
Jack, great idea about swag for the War Room crowd.
I'm making them. Look, guys, I'm making them. I'm taking the commission. If nobody else is going to get this done, I'm going to get it done.
Also, everybody loves maggots for Trump.
I'm not sure about that. You can keep that one.
That's Maget. That's Maget, please. That's Maget's. Okay. I want to go now. We got over the weekend. I was very honored on Saturday and Sunday to be working the territory up in Northeast Pennsylvania with Rod of Iron Ministries in a tremendous conference out there. The Rod of Iron Conference is to bring supporters of the Second Amendment together to hear motivational talks and to hear policy talks about supporting President Trump and really focus on trying to get out the vote. Want to now turn to, we got Justin Moon, who's the owner of Car Arms, right? An innovative gun manufacturer and a gun company that's now relocated. It's actually in Pennsylvania, in Pike County, and the pastor Sean Moon. Justin, Sean, I want to thank you guys very much. First off, Sean, I want to go to you, Pastor Sean. What is Rod of Iron Ministries? The concept Rod of Iron. I was so fascinated when Alexander Priet and the other Pennsylvania crowd came to me. The name in and of itself attracted me to want to be part of it. But what does Rod of Iron Ministries stand for?
Well, the Rod of Iron Ministries, it comes from the scriptures in the Bible that show a decentralized armed society as the kingdom of God, where the rulers or co-heirs with Christ are made into kings and priests, as Revelation chapter 1 and verse 5 states. And as the Bible says in Psalm chapter 2, we shall rule the nations with the rod of iron and dash them to pieces like the potter's vessel. But in the Poimaino rule, that is the shepherd's rule, not obeying man's laws like these crazy Chicon lockdown laws that we were protesting, but God's laws and celebrating God, guns, and country.
So when you look at the CCP virus, Reverend, I want to stay with Pastor Sean, I want to stay with you for a second. I'll come to Justin in a minute. But when you look at the pandemic, when you look at what's going on, and particularly in a state like Pennsylvania, what's your beef? What's your problem with what they've tried to do? Since public health officials are just saying, hey, we want you to wear a mask, we want you to lock down, we want you to social distance, because the way to stop the spread of this virus is to listen to public health officials. So what is Rod of Iron? What's your complaint about that? And what's your complaint? How do you tie that back to your biblical kind of orientation?
Well, the Bible says that we must submit ourselves unto God, but resist the devil, and he will flee. And so it is incumbent on the Christian to stand against unrighteousness. And, you know, our father was freed from a North Korean death camp by U.S. forces, so we know North Korea, we know communism very well, and he always taught us that it was political Satanism, that it's not just an ideology, it actually brings a culture of Satanism and genocide of children, of pedophilia, of breaking up marriages and families and destroying the father in the home, because really the hatred is for Jesus Christ and the Father, to replace him with a Luciferian figure or a fallen Eve figure. But it's been so draconian here. 60% of businesses, as you know, will be devastated and probably won't open again because of these crazy Chicon lockdowns. We essentially have become China here, and we're being forced to shop in Chinese grocery stores like Walmart and Amazon, etc. I mean, we might as well be shopping in Beijing, Steve. It's so crazy that we're experiencing this kind of communist style, iron hand, heavy-fisted lockdown orders. It's unbelievable. This is America.
Justin, I want to go to you, the head of Car Arms. I know that you're very involved in the Second Amendment, and it was one of the main reasons for the conference. As you looking at the conference, you had such a huge draw. Where are Second Amendment advocates right now coming out, particularly in Pennsylvania? I don't think it's getting enough play that Joe Biden and these guys have a pretty radical plan for the Second Amendment. I mean, we won in 16 because working class Democrats, union workers up in Michigan and places like Pennsylvania who are culturally conservative and particularly NRA members and hunters really back the president. Do you think it's getting enough play this time, these issues around the Second Amendment, and do you think it's motivating people?
Oh, absolutely it's motivating people. Well, you know, Steve, Northeast Pennsylvania is really the key area where we've got to keep the Trump coalition in place, and we've got to get out the vote so that Trump can be pushed over the top to be reelected as stay as the 45th president in this 2020 election cycle. And you know what? The good news is that from the local political level, looking at all the alliances that existed in 2016, all the alliances that existed in 2016 are still in place, and they still intend to support President Trump. And, we're working every day right up to the election to get the vote out, to make sure that we bring Pennsylvania over the top for the president and secure a victory for the president in 2020.
So, Justin, let me ask you, how can every piece of polling you're seeing coming out right now has got Pennsylvania, Trump's down 4, he's down 5, he's down 6. There's some polls says he's down 8, 9, or 10. Given the enthusiasm I saw the weekend, given what you just said about the alliances, given the fact that everybody I talked to in Pennsylvania said, hey, people are more motivated than in 16 because they've seen how Trump can deliver. Walk our audience through, are these polls somehow off, or is it really he's that far behind and he's got to make it up with a big game day turnout? What is your thinking about these polls that are out there right now?
Well, let's just compare it relatively to 2016. So they only say that he's 4 points behind and say he only has like a 40% chance of winning the election. Hey, I see that as like 39 points ahead, because going into 2016, they said there was a 99% that Hillary Clinton would win the race, and Trump was so far behind in Pennsylvania, it wasn't even considered a serious toss-up state. So we are in the fight, we are fighting hard, and we will make sure that President Trump wins Pennsylvania.
Justin, one more question for you before I turn back to Sean. Do you think right now Biden's up there trying to be Joe from Scranton instead of the guy that represents the party at Davos and these global corporations from Wilmington? Is Joe Biden getting any traction with working class people in Northeast Pennsylvania, which is, this election could come down to Northeast Pennsylvania? They selected Joe Biden for this particular reason. Is Biden making any inroads in your mind?
Oh, I think Joe Biden has turned into an embarrassment. I think a lot of people in this area don't see Joe Biden as the Joe Biden of the past. They see him as drifting to this anti-police, this pro-communist kind of crazy leftist progressive, and they don't like what they're saying. He used to be a good old boy, but he's not anymore, and he's made his bed with the billionaire elite who want to basically turn us into feudal serfs. So. Well, the people are not stupid here. They're not going to have that. They don't want that. They want their freedom. They want their liberty. They want to be able to own small businesses. They want to have families. They don't want the government messing with their lives. They want to be able to frack. They want to go about doing manufacturing business, have protection for their businesses from Chinese flooding our markets with low-cost goods made by slave labor. So the folks around here know what's going on. And they certainly do see that President Trump has benefited them. So they're not stupid. That's what I got to say, man, Steve.
Pastor Sean, there's such a massive turnout for these two events over the weekend. I was really blown away by it. You see all type of analysis coming out of Washington now that evangelical Christians or faith-based Christians, that Trump overwhelmingly won in 2016, that there's been at least 20 to 25% of that vote that just doesn't believe in President Trump. They think he's been too tough, too much of a bully. For a whole host of reasons, they've turned away. As a pastor, are you seeing that as still this hardcore Christian base, these faith-based people that live their religion, that really focus on lived Christianity? Do you think they still have President Trump's back, or you notice any wavering at all?
Oh, absolutely, Steve. They have President Trump's back 100%. He's the only candidate standing up to stop the genocide of the children, over 70 million killed here in America. That makes almost 1 out of 3 women in America someone who has murdered their child. I mean, we're talking about serious anti-biblical culture. We're talking about drag queen story hours. We're talking about transgenderism being pushed on your kids. We're talking about the normalization of pedophilia in the schools. We're talking about serious sexual licentiousness being pushed upon our Christian children. And if there's anybody out there who claims to be Christian or even loosely related to Christ or Christian faith in general, they must absolutely not vote for Joe Biden. He will bring in the most dangerous form of communism, socialism that this side of the world has ever seen. And we will become like China. I wouldn't be surprised if through the UN, we would see troops on our own borders, Chinese troops. I mean, this is just absolutely over the top insane, but everybody who is in the body of Christ must not stand up for the incredible anti-Christ, anti-Christian positions that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris stand for.
Taking the 70 million people that had abortions, but I want to ask you, we got 30 seconds left. How do you go from Joe Biden being a progressive Democrat to having Chinese troops on the border? You got 30 seconds. Walk me through the logic of that.
Well, if you have, for example, if there's chaos, if there's a civil war that may break out, the left on the West Coast have been saying they may succeed. They may ask for humanitarian aid, quote, or medical supplies. And of course, the UN and different militaries that are, in the UN could, be invited into those different areas, and they could be, used for what they would call humanitarian aid. But we would literally have military here in China, just like they did a couple of years in Germany, with the UN doing those kind of operations. So that's something that we definitely don't want to see. We got free from North Korea. We don't want America to become North Korea. God bless you, Steve, and God bless America.
All right,
get your social media up in the next segment. Thank you guys for joining us.
Okay, we have Michael.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
President of the United States said yesterday at the rally in Sanford, Florida, that he has directed the head of the FBI to now go and arrest those people who tore down the statue of and desecrated the statue of Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt in Portland. We're going to be joined in a moment by one of the best combat reporters around, spent years in Afghanistan, Michael Yon. Before I do that, I finally met a couple of guys, Raheem and Jack, that made me look kind of moderate when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party. The Justin Moon and Sean Pastor Moon. I mean, wow! I tell you what, I want to hear the War Room I want to hear the live stream and the at hashtag War Room Pandemic. What they got to say. Pastor Sean just brought the heat. Jack, I know you got some thoughts about that. Tell me what you're thinking about Pastor Sean and Justin.
The whole time I saw these guys sitting there, I was just thinking our founding fathers must be smiling because their experiment worked, right? You look at these two great Korean Americans. One of them's a preacher. One of them's a gunsmith. What is that? That's the American experience all in one nugget, because where did the militia meet? They brought their weapons to church. And after church, they mustered so that they could protect their town and their families and be the militia that made this country. Guys, power, hand salute. The fans love you. Also, I want to just comment quickly on that video. People, that's called pushing back.
Yeah, this is, I got to tell you, this thing out in Portland, I'm going to go now to Michael Yon. Michael, you've been in some of the toughest combat situations America's faced over the last 20 years. I mean, it's the reason that I originally met you was through Andrew Breitbart. And Andrew Breitbart was a massive fan of your work early on in Afghanistan and all the wars in the Middle East. You're now out, you're in embed out on the West Coast. Give us your observation of what's going on. Tell our audience, we've been covering this nonstop. We've got Jack Posobiec, we've had other embeds, but we just don't think the story's getting out and the mainstream media refuses to cover it. Tell our audience what's really happening.
Hey, Steve, I love your show. I've been watching since it began in January. And then Hong Kong, of course, kicked me out on February 5th. I've been out of the United States for most of the last 20 years, mostly in conflicts, Iraq, Afghanistan, Thailand, Nepal, various places. So when I came back to the United States now, by the way, I would be in Taiwan right now if I were not back here for this. I came straight to Portland because Portland is clearly a huge nexus of what's going on. The first thing I do when I go to a conflict is set up my intel network, which is this time amazingly easy because there's a lot of pushback against Antifa and BLM here in in Portland. For instance, if you look at my Twitter feed, which is Michael_Jan, you'll see that a couple of nights ago I said hours in advance they were going to attack the statues. And last night I said hours in advance again that they would put up that nightmare elk again. So the intel here is coming very vibrantly. I'll be out with Proud Boys tonight. They're not going to do anything active. They're just coming to meet me, actually. And so, and I've asked them to watch your show today, actually, and make comments to say what's happening from their side. So what I'm seeing here is a government that's out of control. We've got a potential mayor of Portland, if she's elected. She's a clear supporter of the ideas of Mao and Stalin and Che Guevara and all those people that have caused so much death and destruction. But many of the people in Portland are pushing back.
Let's go. I want to go back to the days of rage, or the day of rage on the Indigenous Peoples Day that tore down the statues. I mean, that was a pretty organized effort. They had the grappling hooks. This looked like Jackson Square when they took down there, or Lafayette Park when they took down the statue of Andrew Jackson. I mean, this was pretty organized. I know the president got upset at that time. I know he ordered people to be arrested. I haven't seen any people arrested so far from that. Maybe they did. It hasn't been publicized. How can Michael Jan, who just gets off a plane from Hong Kong or Taiwan or Thailand, get embedded up there and has a better information network? Why did the authorities not know about this, and why did federal authorities not know about it? How could they get the grappling hooks up there and look like a pretty organized thing and topple the statues if hours beforehand you knew what was going on? This is the frustration. Where's the federal authority? 3 segments ago, we had the president saying last night he's ordered Ray on the FBI. Why wasn't Ray ordered beforehand to keep an eye on this thing? Everybody knows Columbus Day has gotten to be a hot button. Rudy Giuliani, there's not even a Columbus Day parade in New York City anymore. He used to be the greatest in the world, right? Not even a Columbus Day parade. He's got to go down to Philadelphia where they've got the Columbus statues covered up by plywood, and it's all graffiti. So how does Michael Jan know about this, but the federal authorities don't know about it? So now we have another victory for the radicals, for the cultural Marxists, for the Red Guards, so they can tear down Abraham Lincoln, the great liberator and great nationalist, right, that saved the Union, built the Transcontinental Railroad, passed the Homestead Act, passed the College Act for colleges so everybody go to college, the Land Grant University Act. The guy's the greatest nationalist in the history of the country. How can we allow his statue to be desecrated? Michael Jan knows about it, but where are the federal authorities?
Yeah, check my Twitter. You'll see hours in advance I published they were going to hit the statue. And I published hours in advance they would put up that elk statue last night. Now, to be very clear, federal authorities absolutely 100% know about it. That's a fact. I communicate with feds every single day here. So they did know about it. And they knew about it in advance, and they told me in advance. They're one of the people. Also, Proud Boys knew, and others knew. So it's well known. But the feds, their hands are tied. I mean, what can they do? They can't do anything because nobody's allowing them to do their jobs. They're just taking casualties, eye injuries from the lasers, hearing injuries from the massive, very big fireworks, bricks, slingshots. One federal agent got hit in the shin with a slingshot, embedded a ball bearing or something into a shin bone. I mean, the Antifa here is very easy to knock out if the order is given. It's too simple.
Well, how do you knock out Antifa? It sounds like they get more powerful every day. We're in day 150 of this siege of Portland. Tell me how, if it's so easy, why is it not being done?
It's not being done because the local government's not allowing it to be done. When they're arrested, like Portland Police Department arrested 20 or 25 about 3 nights ago, and they were immediately released.
By the way, federal authorities can override that. You can override that. It's just political will if you want to do it or not, right? You don't have to. If some mayor in some city wants to have Asians or Latinos or African Americans or people or Catholics rounded up, and they want to do that, it doesn't mean that we can accept that. Federal authority goes in and says, you're not going to do that, right? And here's what you're going to do. This is about political will, right? Why is this not being done? If you're saying they all know about it, then you're saying federal authority is comfortable with, and that goes all the way up to the White House, they're comfortable with having a Lincoln statue desecrated. And then afterwards, they said they're going to be arrested. Where are the arrests in Lafayette Park? Where are the arrests around the rest of the country? I keep hearing about, oh, they got a couple hundred arrested. I haven't seen any perp walks. I haven't seen any faces or anything. I haven't seen any charges brought. So in your relationships with the federal authorities, what's going on?
It's a political will. I mean, you just nailed it. There's no other place to go with that. That's where it begins and that's where it stops. Political will. As soon as they decide to do something, most of the Antifa, their names are known. I mean, they're very well known. Their photos are out. You know, many of them have already been arrested before. This is too simple. All we need is for a high authority to say that is enough, and we can stop it right immediately.
What? Tell us now. You're out there. You've gotten to know the Proud Boys. Tell us about this. They got a question at the debate. President Trump, according, people said, "Hey, didn't answer it hard enough." I was actually being interviewed on Showtime's The Circus at that time. Is Proud Boys? I've never known them to be a white supremacist organization. I don't know much about them, but I knew some of the guys associated with them. The guys I knew were never white supremacists. It was kind of a male bonding association or Western civilization to promote that, to promote camaraderie and male bonding, things like that. But how did you've been spending time out there with them. Why don't you describe what they're like? What type of people are they? Are they solid citizens? What do we got here?
I'll be out with Proud Boys tonight. They're probably, the ones I'll be out with are probably watching your show right now because I told them I was coming on. They're not racial supremacists. I haven't seen that at all. In fact, many are black or Hispanic. I mean, they're different races, actually. Now, if you want to talk about racial supremacy, that's Antifa, that's BLM. That's also Boogaloo Boys, Ku Klux Klan. That's your racial supremacists right there. But Proud Boys, they're not that. Joe Biden, out of all the different groups in the world to pick, he picked the exact one wrong. The exact group that he should not have picked and grouped in with the racial supremacists because they're simply not. They're racially very diverse.
You've been in combat situations for 20 years. You've really been out of the country. In countries, predominantly Islamic countries, but I know you spent a lot of time in Southeast Asian and Asian countries. I've never known you. You're a guy. It's always been a very straightforward, no background or anything about white supremacism. So how did Proud Boys get wrapped up into this group like KKK and people like that? They're clearly neo-Confederates. Are clearly white supremacists. How the Proud Boys get rolled up into that?
Maybe a couple things. One is Joe Biden still thinks he's running for Senate, so then he picks out Proud Boys, which is exactly the wrong group to finger for this. Joe Biden's just Joe Biden. I mean, what can you do with that? And secondly, they are gaining power. Proud Boys. I mean, they're telling me there's different chapters all over the country and internationally at this point. They're growing, and so I think that the Democrats see them as a threat. They see Proud Boys as a threat. Not as a physical threat, because these aren't the guys out burning things down. They're just not like that. They're just good old boys, basically, and a lot of them are black, a lot are Hispanic. They're fine to be around. I do not feel I'll be alone with them tonight. I would not go alone with a bunch of Antifa people. I would probably be killed. But I'm not afraid to go alone with Proud Boys. They're not going to hurt me.
So, Michael, last thing. What's your Twitter handle? How do people get more access to all your reporting out there?
Go to Twitter. My Twitter is Michael_Yon. My last name is Y-O-N, Yankee Oscar November.
Do you get any sense after President Trump's, we got about 30 seconds, after President Trump's, what he said at the rally yesterday, is there any more focus by federal authorities on cleaning up the mess out in Portland, yes or no?
No, not at this point. And I'll be communicating with feds like the moment I get off the phone with you. I mean, they're very frustrated. They want to. They're pulling at the reins to go get these guys. If President Trump wants to put a stop to this, he can do it.
Michael Yon, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. Good luck and be safe.
I love coming on, Steve. I'll talk with you all later.
Thanks, brother. Hey, Raheem, here's what I don't get. What's the disconnect between President Trump saying this at a rally and it hasn't been done now in months and months and months? We've seen this Antifa thing. You got about 15, 20 seconds, then we'll bring it back after the break. But it's frustrating to people. Why is there such a big disconnect between the rhetoric and the action?
The only thing I can think of at this point in time is the politicking behind it. That there is hay to be made of having these riots continuing out there, and I think it's a cynical thing. And I don't think it's coming from the president necessarily himself, but more some of the people around him. You talk. How many times have we heard about banning Antifa? Banning Antifa. Where's the ban?
Short commercial break. War and pandemic. We'll be back in a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Why would the NBA take $500 million plus from a country that is engaging in ethnic cleansing?
So basically you're saying that nobody should do business with China ever.
Why don't you just answer my question?
No, Megan, I'm just trying to get to the root of it. So
why would the NBA do that? You are the one who said
they are a customer. They are a customer of ours. And guess what, Megan? I'm okay with doing business with China. You know, I wish I could solve all the world's problems, Megan. I'm sure you do too. But we can't. And so we have to pick our battles. And while you'd like to get proclamations so you can create a clip that says, look what I got Mark to say, you don't want to deal with the actual action item. You might think silence is violence, but action gets change, right? And so when I start to talk about creating our silence,
I mean,
you wouldn't let me say it. You stopped me every single time and said I was changing the subject.
Providing for asylum for those seeking it does absolutely nothing to help.
Okay.
Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner, came out and said, we recognize that Daryl Morey, he was the Rockets GM, Morey's views, quote, have deeply offended our friends and fans in China, which is regrettable. We have great respect for the history and culture of China and hope that sports and the NBA can be used as a unifying force to bridge cultural divides. In response to which, many people, here's just one example, Florida Senator Rick Scott came out and said, the NBA is more interested in money than in human rights. They are kowtowing to Beijing, and it's shameful. So you tell me whether the NBA needs to get more vocal in condemning what we're now seeing there, which is an ethnic cleansing of a minority Muslim group known as the Uyghurs. 1 million or more are being held against their will right now, men, women, and children facing torture, forced labor, physical and sex abuse, coercive population control, forced abortion, forced sterilizations. And the question remains, why won't you and the NBA explicitly condemn that?
So first, we pay attention. I personally, okay, let's just talk about me. I personally put a priority on domestic issues. Right? When it comes to human rights, I'm against all human rights violations around the world. China
including the ones in China?
China is not the only country with human rights violations.
Right, but including the ones in China, you're against their human rights violations?
I'm against all human rights violations.
Including China, Mark?
Yes, including China. Any human rights violations anywhere are wrong.
Welcome back to the War Room. I'm a huge Mark Cuban fan, and I'm not a Megyn Kelly fan. Ever since she tried to kneecap President Trump in the first debate back in 2015, August 2015. Remember the first Fox debate? Breitbart. We went savage on Megyn Kelly for about a month. In fact, she was whining so much that she sicked Roger Ailes on us. But even with my close relationship with Roger, we didn't back off. However, that was a masterclass. We're going to put the whole thing up. You got to listen to the whole interview. Mark Cuban, I guess his media guys didn't tell him that it was no holds barred. She came out. I thought it was an absolutely brilliant interview. It shows you when Megyn Kelly's on, she's pretty good. I mean, it was Mark Cuban's a smart guy. Mark Cuban's a tough guy. Mark Cuban understands the way the world works. She jammed him up right from the get-go on this China situation. And to be brutally frank, Mark's rationale, quite frankly, his excuses just didn't pass muster. So Megyn Kelly, remember, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and Megyn Kelly really went on the warpath against the NBA. And I got to tell you, seeing Adam Silver on the other night, that wimp talking about the most woke league in the world with the cratering of their of their ratings, and President Trump just mocking them last night from the stage. He says, "Oh yeah, I think we're going to have a return to normalcy next year." Well, your return to normalcy, sir, should not be about taking Black Lives Matter logos off the jerseys or logos off the courts or anything like that. The return to normalcy is to make sure that you don't support the slave labor in China. It's unacceptable what the NBA is doing, and quite frankly, for people paying, the taxpayers paying for these stadiums, etc., you're making everybody in this country complicit in your greed to go to China and basically partner with the Chinese Communist Party, right? And it's not just, Megyn Kelly was jamming them up at the Uyghurs, but it's the underground Catholic Church, it's the underground evangelical Christians, it's the Falun Gong, it's the Tibetan Buddhists, and it's just normal citizens, right? They're under this totalitarian dictatorship, the organ harvesting, the slave labor, all of it. And, it's easy to look the other way. It's easy to rationalize that I only focus on domestic problems and not international. But hey, when it's, you heard Reverend Sean Moon in the last segment or 2 segments ago, and look, he's hardcore. He calls Walmart and Amazon Chinese stores, right? Selling you Chinese Communist Party junk every day. So, Raheem, Jack, Raheem, you make your living doing this. What's your assessment of Megyn Kelly jamming our good friend Mark Cuban?
It was impressive, especially when he clearly didn't want to answer the question of China-specific human rights abuses, right? China-specific human. He said, "I condemn all human rights abuses." That's what people say when they don't want to go on the record because they know it will hurt them in the pocket somehow. And she managed to get that out of him. It's these sorts of moments, by the way, that create change. And it's because now Mark Cuban has said, whether or not he wanted to say it, he said it. He may well find that it is no longer in his business interest to keep not saying it.
Well, I think that I've said it for 2 weeks now. The biggest tell is the collapse in viewership of the NBA Finals. And what's happening is this is not just like old suburban white guys. This is in their hardcore demographic of 18 to 34-year-olds. And the reason why, Steve, and you pointed it out well, the American people are sick and tired of watching their own moral values be abused by these large corporate entities. And you also pointed out well, local communities should stop funding at the cost of billions of tax dollars these stadiums and all of these other things that go along with having an NBA team in your town. The American people should not have their values be sold out on the backs of the NBA profiteers and the Chinese Communist Party. That's just the way I feel.
Who's the National Pulse at 3, Raheem, real quick? I want to say something else about Megyn Kelly.
Steve Cortez at 3 p.m.
Oh, Steve doesn't get any better. Steve Cortez from the campaign, former war room. Okay, but by the way, that's the reason Megyn Kelly wanted to play it. You had a mainstream media person really lighten somebody up for the first time. I think it's powerful. And for people looking, I don't know why Megyn Kelly's on the bench. NBC couldn't make her likable because she's not likable, but she's a damn good interviewer. Somebody ought to get her off the bench and put her back to work. The podcast is great, but she ought to be back at work, okay? See you tomorrow at 10 a.m.